It started with a knock, not the polite kind you'd expect on a Saturday morning, but a pounding so sharp it rattled my porch and sent a chill straight through my coffee cup. When I opened the door, there she was, Karen, clipboard in hand, standing like she owned the place, and with one sentence, she made it clear she wasn't here to talk, she was here to take over. She claimed my cabin, my private land, was about to host 100 people for an HOA retreat. Vans and SUVs were already rolling up like it was a concert, and in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a knock on the door. This was the beginning of war. Karen didn't flinch when I told her this was my private property. Instead, she lifted her clipboard like it was a weapon and started rattling off rules and subsections, quoting HOA bylaws like scripture. According to Rule 13, subsection 4, she began, her voice loud enough for the vans behind her to hear, but I cut her off. This isn't a shared amenity, I said, pointing straight at the heavy iron gate I had installed myself 2 years earlier. This is my land, my cabin, my rules. And you're not hosting a party here. The flush rising on her face told me I'd hit a nerve. She wasn't expecting resistance, and the timing couldn't have been worse for her because, behind her, the crowd was already building. SUVs idled with their engines running, pickup trucks stacked high with foldable tables and coolers. People in lawn chairs tapped their phones, waiting for Karen to tell them what to do. She hissed through clenched teeth. You're making a scene. You're going to embarrass yourself in front of the whole community. A slow smile crept across my face. Oh, you want a scene? I asked. Then I turned on my heel, walked past her, and headed for the gate. Normally, I kept it wide open, but not today. With both hands I swung the heavy iron bars closed. The sound echoed like a warning bell across the gravel. Then I locked it once, and then again, just for good measure. The effect was instant. Murmurs rippled through the line of vehicles. Someone shouted out a question. Another honked their horn in frustration. A group of kids pressed their faces against the windows, confused why the party wasn't starting. Karen's clipboard trembled in her hand. You can't just lock out the neighborhood, she snapped, her voice cracking under the weight of 100 eyes. Watching, I looked her dead in the eye. I just did. Phones were already raised, recording every second. This wasn't just an argument anymore, it was a showdown, broadcast live to the neighborhood grapevine. I strolled back to my porch, coffee still in hand, and let the silence stretch. If Karen wanted a fight, I was more than ready to give her one. From where I sat, I could hear the panic slipping into her voice as she tried to calm the crowd. He's bluffing, she said to someone nearby. This is HOA approved, and he has to comply. But the truth was, I wasn't bluffing at all. My cabin wasn't just fenced, it was wired. Cameras covered every inch of the property, recording from multiple angles. If anyone dared to set foot past that gate, I'd have it all on record. Karen might have shown up with her clipboard and her crowd, but I had something better, iron-proof, and the law. And if she thought a little HOA jargon was going to scare me into giving up my home, she was about to learn the hard way. It didn't take long for Karen to escalate. Within minutes, I heard her voice carrying across the driveway as she barked into her phone. Yes, officer, he's obstructing an HOA-approved gathering. No, I don't have a signed permission slip, but this is a community matter. I nearly spit out my coffee. A permission slip. This wasn't a field trip, this was my land. Still, she paced like a general whose troops were losing patience, desperate for backup. Behind her, cars were stacking up in both directions, drivers honking and grumbling. What was supposed to be a cheerful retreat was turning into a traffic jam, fueled by tension. And then, 20 minutes later, a sheriff's cruiser rolled down the road, lights off but presence heavy. Karen practically sprinted toward it, waving her clipboard like a flag of surrender. There, that's him, she shrieked, pointing straight at me as if I were some wanted fugitive. The deputy stepped out slowly, hand resting on his belt, eyes scanning the crowd. Collected, not the savior Karen had imagined. Sir, he called, his voice steady. Would you mind coming down here for a moment? I walked down, documents in hand, phone ready. Afternoon, officer, I said evenly. Just so. We're clear, this is my property. I've got the deed right here. Karen cut in before he could answer, her voice sharp and desperate. He's exploiting this space for personal gain. It's listed as part of the common area in the community. Documents, he's lying to you. Without a word, I handed the deputy my paperwork. He studied the deed, flipping to the section I'd highlighted in bright yellow. The amendment from 2020, the very one that showed my land had been negotiated out of jurisdiction when I bought it. My cabin, my property, entirely independent. I watched the moment reality hit. Karen, her mouth opened, but no words came out, just a strangled gasp. The deputy closed the folder, shrugged and said plainly, Ma'am, unless you've got a court order or some kind of legal claim, he's within his rights. You can't use this property without his permission. The murmurs in the crowd turned into full-on whispers. Guests shifted uncomfortably, realizing they weren't about to enjoy the retreat they'd been promised. A few started heading back to their cars. The deputy looked back at me. If anyone tries to breach that gate, give us a call. We'll handle it. Will do. I replied, calm as ever. Karen's entire plan had just collapsed in front of everyone, neighbors, guests, and even the law. But I knew better than to celebrate too soon. Because if there was one thing I'd learned about Karen over the years, it was this. She didn't quit, she regrouped, and the next move was going to be hers. For a moment, it looked like Karen had finally been defeated. The sheriff's words hung in the air like a verdict, her clipboard clutched uselessly at her side. But deep down, I knew better. Karen wasn't the type to walk away and lick her wounds. She was the type to regroup, reload, and come back swinging with a different weapon. Sure enough, the very next morning, I found 3 fresh letters taped to my gate, each one printed in bold fonts and wrapped in legal jargon that tried to sound official. The first letter read, "Notice of violation, unauthorized use of former HOA grounds." The second, "Intent to fine $500 per day until compliance is met." And the third, her grand finale, "Demand to host a make-up community retreat within 7 days or face consequences." I stood there at the gate, flipping through the stack, and I couldn't help but laugh. This was classic Karen when she couldn't win face-to-face. She buried you in paperwork, hoping the weight of it would crush your will. But not me. I walked back inside, tossed the letters straight into the wood stove, struck a match, and watched them curl into ash. Of course, I wasn't reckless. I knew exactly what she was doing. Her plan wasn't to enforce anything legally. She had no authority to do that. Her plan was to intimidate, to wear me down until I gave in just to make her go away. What she didn't realize was that I had something stronger than her empty threats. Proof. That same day, I sat down at my desk, opened my email, and typed out a short but powerful message to the HOA board. I attached everything: my purchase contract, the boundary survey, and the amendment from 2020, the very document that carved my cabin out of HOA jurisdiction forever. The email was brief. No fluff, no room for argument. Any attempt to trespass on or assert authority over this property will be considered harassment and pursued accordingly. I hit send and went about my day, stacking firewood and enjoying the quiet she had tried to ruin. By afternoon, a reply popped into my inbox. It was from the HOA secretary. Her words were short, polite, and almost apologetic. "We acknowledge your exemption and have advised Karen to cease any further action. We apologize for the confusion." Confusion. That was the word they used. I almost laughed out loud. Karen wasn't confused, she was furious. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was Karen, desperate to maintain control, and now officially backed into a corner by her own board. But if the HOA thought an apology would stop her, they didn't know Karen the way I did. And soon enough, she'd prove me right. For about a day, things were quiet. Too quiet. The HOA board had backed off. The apology sat in my inbox. And I thought maybe, just maybe, Karen had finally gotten the message. But if there was one thing I should have known by now, it was this: Karen never quit. 3 nights later, at exactly 12:42 a.m., I was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of tires crunching over gravel. My motion sensors blinked red across my phone screen. Someone was out there. I slipped on my boots, grabbed my flashlight, and checked the cameras. Sure enough, headlights glared against my gate, and a black SUV sat parked just beyond the fence line. But what really made my blood boil wasn't the carrot, was the people. For of them, hauling folding chairs, a giant canopy, and clipboards under the cover of darkness. A retreat. At midnight, on private land, I stormed down the gravel path, beam of my flashlight cutting through the night. "Hey," I shouted, voice sharp enough to stop them mid-step. "This is private property. What do you think you're doing?" They froze like deer caught in headlights. One man clutched the clipboard tighter, another shifted nervously, glancing at the SUV like he was debating whether to run. Finally, one of them spoke, his voice shaky. "Karen told us this was approved." Approved. At midnight, on land. The sheriff had already cleared his mind. Karen lied. I shot back, stepping closer until the flashlight beam hit their faces. "You've got 30 seconds to pack it all back up and leave before I call the sheriff. And this time, I won't be so forgiving, I'll press charges." For a moment, no one moved. Then, like a dam breaking, they scrambled. Chairs clattered back into the SUV. The canopy toppled, curses muttered under their breath. Within minutes, they were gone, taillights fading down the road. But before the quiet returned, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number lit up the screen. "You're making this a bigger deal than it has to be. Don't forget, you still live in this community." Karen. I stood there, phone glowing in the dark, anger simmering hotter than the coffee I hadn't even made yet. This wasn't just about an event anymore. This was personal. She wanted me to bend. She wanted me to surrender. But what she didn't realize was that by sending that message, by crossing that line, she'd given me exactly what I needed: proof, evidence, and I was done playing defense. If Karen wanted a war, then it was time for me to hit back harder than ever before. The morning after the midnight stunt, I knew I couldn't let this slide. Karen had crossed the line from nuisance to full-blown harassment. If she thought I'd just roll over, she was about to learn. The hard why wasn't someone who gave in. I started gathering everything. Security camera footage of the SUV parked at my gate. Audio of my heated exchange with her board members. Screenshots of the text message she sent proof of intimidation. Every scrap of evidence went into a thick folder I labeled HOA war. Then, I called my lawyer. When I explained the situation, he let out a low whistle. They tried to host an unapproved event on your property at midnight, and she sent you that message. That's gold. We'll hit them with trespassing, harassment, and interference of property rights. She won't see it coming. That was exactly what I needed to hear. For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground shift in my favor. By noon, my lawyer had already drafted a cease and desist letter addressed directly to Karen and the entire HOA board. It spelled everything out in cold, hard legal language. The land was mine. The HOA had zero jurisdiction. Any further trespassing would result in immediate legal action. I signed it, scanned it, and my lawyer hand-delivered it straight to their office. But I didn't stop there. I forwarded copies of the letter to the county sheriff's department, the zoning commission, and even the local news tip line. If Karen wanted a war of influence, I was ready to shine a spotlight so bright that everyone would see exactly what kind of neighbor she really was. That evening, just as the sun dipped behind the ridge, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Nice move, but lawyers won't save you from the board. No signature this time, but I didn't need one. I could practically hear Karen's smug voice between the lines. I chuckled, shaking my head. If anything, her arrogance confirmed. I was getting under her skin, and that was good, because the more reckless she became, the stronger my case grew. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because the fight was over, far from it, but because, for the first time, Karen wasn't the only one holding the cards. She had her clipboard, her fake authority, her midnight invasions, but I had the law. And the law doesn't play favorites. When the HOA announced a special emergency meeting at the town hall, I knew exactly what it meant. Karen was rallying her troops. She wanted to make me the villain, paint me as some stubborn outsider refusing to cooperate with the community. But this time, I was ready. I walked into the town hall, carrying my thick folder of evidence under one arm. The room buzzed with chatter, neighbors crammed into folding chairs, some whispering, some glaring, all waiting for fireworks. At the front, Karen sat like a queen on her throne, flanked by board members. She spotted me and smirked, as if victory were already in her pocket. She banged her gavel. Let's come to order. Tonight, we're here to address the issue of known compliance regarding property regulations by one of our residents. I didn't even get a chance to sit down before Karen launched into her speech. She painted a picture of me as a reckless neighbor who refused to follow simple community guidelines and who posed a risk to neighborhood harmony. Her words dripped with venom, every sentence crafted to sway the crowd. For a moment, I let her talk, let her dig the hole deeper. Then, when she finally paused, I stood. May I respond? The room hushed. I opened my folder and laid the first photo on the tabula still framed for my security camera. Karen's SUV, parked at my gate, midnight timestamp glowing in the corner. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Here's your board president, I said calmly, trespassing on my property. After hours, without notice or approval. Next, I displayed the text she sent me. Murmurs grew louder, neighbors exchanging wide-eyed looks. Karen's face turned a shade redder than her lipstick. And here, I continued, is a cease and desist letter, signed by my attorney. Legally, binding, this document confirms what I've said all along. My land is not under HOA jurisdiction. Karen knows this. The board knows this. Yet they continue harassing me, trying to seize control they do not have. The crowd erupted, half in shock, half in outrage. Some neighbors looked betrayed, whispering, I didn't know she did that. Others crossed their arms, glaring at Karen. Her gavel slammed against the table. This meeting is out of order. She barked, but her voice wavered. For the first time, she wasn't in control. I leaned forward, my voice steady and sharp. No, Karen. What's out of order is this board, thinking it can bully homeowners into submission. You don't own me, and if you keep pushing, you'll be the one answering to the county. The room went silent. For once, the queen had no comeback. The town hall meeting should have ended the battle. Any reasonable person, cornered by that much evidence, would have backed down, maybe even resigned. But Karen wasn't reasonable. She wasn't about to lose her throne without a fight. The very next morning, I woke up to find bright orange violation notices taped across my fence. 5 of them, each one citing ridiculous infractions: unapproved exterior paint color, improper landscaping, even noise disturbance. It was laughable. My fence hadn't been painted in years. My yard was perfectly maintained, and I hadn't made a sound past 9 p.m. This wasn't regulation. It was retaliation. I pulled each notice off the fence and tossed them into a pile on my kitchen table. If Karen thought drowning me in fake violations would scare me, she was wrong. All she was doing was building my case stronger. But Karen didn't stop there. That afternoon, I overheard neighbors talking at the local cafe. She'd started spreading rumors that I was planning to build a commercial property on my land, that I'd bring down property values, that I couldn't be trusted. Her smear campaign spread fast. Some neighbors avoided eye contact when I waved. Others whispered behind their hands. A few, thankfully, came straight to me and admitted they didn't buy it. She's losing it, one of them said. Everyone can see what she's doing. Still, the tension was real. Karen's strategy was clear. Isolate me, make me the enemy of the community, and regain the control she lost at the town hall. That evening, as if to drive her point home, I heard engines rumbling outside. 3 HOA board members parked across the street, arms folded, just watching my house. No conversation, no explanation, just intimidation. Their silhouettes lingered under the streetlights for over an hour. I couldn't help but laugh to myself. They thought this was power, parking cars and playing watchdogs. It was pathetic. But underneath my amusement, I knew one thing: Karen was spiraling, and desperate people make dangerous moves, so I prepared. I kept my cameras rolling, updated my lawyer daily, and started compiling a second binder labeled retaliation. Every fake violation, every rumor, every stunt, they all went in. Karen thought she was tightening the noose around me. In reality, she was wrapping it around her own neck. Because when the truth came out tanned, Karen wouldn't just lose her crown. She'd lose everything she built her power on, and I was going to make sure of it. Karen had always ruled the HOA with fear. People followed her not because they respected her, but because they were afraid of crossing her. But fear has an expiration date, and after the town hall disaster and her barrage of fake violations, the cracks began to show. It started small. One evening, while walking back from the mailbox, a neighbor I barely knew slowed his car and rolled down the window. "Hey," said cautiously, glancing around. "For what it's worth, I'm with you. Karen's gone too far." Then he drove off before anyone could see. The next day, another neighbor dropped a folded note in my mailbox. No signature, just a message. "We're tired of her. Keep fighting." It wasn't just whispers anymore. People were choosing sides. And Karen hated that. At the next HOA board gathering, word got out that one of her own board members had resigned. Officially, it was personal reasons. Unofficially, it was exhaustion. They were tired of being dragged into her vendetta against me. The board was shrinking, and so was her power. But the real turning point came at a Saturday community barbecue. Karen showed up in her usual fashion, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp, ready to survey the scene. But instead of greeting her with smiles, people avoided her. Conversations stopped when she approached. Parents pulled their kids closer. Then, one brave resident, a man named David, finally said what everyone else had been thinking, loud enough for half the crowd to hear. He looked her in the eye and said, "Karen, this neighborhood isn't your kingdom. We're not your subjects. Stop harassing people." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's face went pale, then flushed red. She opened her mouth to bark back, but no words came out. For the first time, the crowd wasn't behind her, they were against her. By the time the barbecue ended, Karen had stormed off, muttering under her breath. But the damage was already done. The mask had slipped. Everyone had seen it. The queen without her crown. From that moment on, she wasn't feared anymore. She was resented. I watched from my porch that night as neighbors gathered in small groups, talking, shaking their heads, pointing toward her house. It was like a tide turning slow at first, but unstoppable. Karen had wanted to make me an outcast. Instead, she had made herself one. And deep down, I knew the final blow was coming. Not from me, not from lawyers, but from the very people she thought she controlled. The kingdom she built on fear was collapsing. And I didn't even have to lift a finger. When fear no longer worked, Karen tried something new: sympathy. She started showing up at neighborhood events without her clipboard, dressed down, all smiles and forced cheer. She handed out cookies at the park, complimented people on their gardens, and even posted on the HOA page about building community unity, but nobody bought it. Her smile looked painted on, and her voice cracked under the weight of her own desperation. People didn't see a leader anymore. They saw a woman clawing at the remnants of power she had already lost. Still, Karen wasn't finished. She had one last card to play, and she played it hard. It was a Thursday morning when I found a thick envelope shoved under my cabin door. Inside, stapled neatly, was a stack of papers marked cease and desist. According to Karen, I had slandered her name, interfered with community activities, and threatened members of the HOA. She claimed damages in the thousands and demanded I retract every statement I had ever made about her. I almost laughed out loud. It wasn't an official court filing, just something she'd cobbled together from a template she probably found online, but the message was clear. If she couldn't control me through rules or fear, she would try to bury me under the illusion of legal threats. That same evening, the HOA held another emergency meeting. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. I had already sent the board copies of her fake paperwork, along with the videos of her late-night trespassing attempts and the threatening text she had sent me weeks earlier. From my porch, I could see the glow of the community center lights, hear the muffled voices rising and falling. It went on for hours, longer than any meeting I could remember. Finally, cars began to trickle out. But instead of silence returning to the street, I heard something else. Cheers, applause, and then, unmistakably, Karen's voice, furious, drowning under the sound of people clapping. The next day, I got the call. Mark, the HOA president, sounded almost relieved as he delivered the news. "Daniel, it's official. The board voted last night Karen has been permanently removed from her position. She's banned from serving in any HOA role again. He paused, almost as if savoring it. And the board is issuing her a formal warning for harassment. One more incident, and she faced legal consequences. I thanked him and hung up, a long breath escaping me. It was over. At least it seemed like it was. Karen had built her entire identity on control. Stripped of her title, her influence, and her audience, she had nothing left but bitterness. And as much as I wanted to believe this was the end, something in me whispered otherwise. Because people like Karen don't just vanish quietly. They plot, they stew, and sometimes they come back even louder. The battle was over, but the war, that remained to be seen. For a short while, the neighborhood felt lighter without Karen pulling strings. The streets were quieter, the HOA meetings shorter, and the tension that once hung over every community event finally began to lift. I could almost believe it was over. Almost. But then came the night Karen made her final move. It was a Saturday evening, the kind of night when the crickets hummed and the cabin sat peaceful under a wash of moonlight. I was halfway through stacking wood when my security system pinged, multiple motion alerts. Front gate, east fence line, rear property corner. My phone screen lit up with live feeds. 3 separate groups moving in the dark. Folding tables, coolers, and boxers were being dragged through the woods as if they were staging some covert operation. At the center of it all, Karen, clipboard in hand, barking orders like a general reclaiming lost territory. Her plan was set past my gates, set up an emergency HOA retreat, and dare me to stop her once everything was in motion. But she underestimated 2 things. 1, I wasn't asleep. And 2, I'd already upgraded my security. The second their vans rolled up, my floodlights snapped on, blinding half her recruits. A siren blared, loud enough to shake the branches overhead. Karen froze, her smug expression twisting into shock as cameras zoomed in from every angle, capturing the entire fiasco in crystal clear detail. I didn't even bother stepping outside. Instead, I picked up the phone and dialed the sheriff. "Yeah, it's Daniel," I said calmly. "We've got trespassers again. You might want to hurry. Looks like they're trying to host a party on my land." By the time the deputy cruisers pulled up, Karen's grand scheme had collapsed into chaos. Guests were abandoning their tables, shoving boxers back into vehicles, shouting over each other about being misled, and Karen, she stood in the middle of it all, screaming that this was community property, waving her clipboard like a white flag no one respected anymore. The deputies didn't argue. They took statements, reviewed the footage, and then quietly led Karen aside. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught the important ones: criminal trespass, harassment, and charges may be filed. Her army scattered, leaving only the echo of her voice cracking under the weight of reality. For the first time, Karen looked small, her authority gone, her followers vanished, her war lost. The next morning, I received the final word. The HOA board issued a public statement. Karen was officially banned from all community activities indefinitely. No titles, no power, no second chances. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over my quiet land. The gate stood, locked, the cameras hummed softly, and the cabin was mine alone, untouchable. Karen had thrown everything she had at me through its paperwork, rumors, even late-night invasions. And in the end, all she accomplished was proving the one truth she never wanted to face. You can't take what doesn't belong to you. The battle was finished. The war was over. And for the first time in months, peace wasn't just a hope, it was real. When I think back on it now, Karen's downfall didn't happen in one big moment. It happened piece by piece, like bricks being pulled out of a crumbling wall. First, it was her arrogance when she tried to seize my cabin. Then, her embarrassment in front of the sheriff. Next, the humiliation of being stripped of her position. And finally, the disaster of her midnight invasion that ended with deputies on her doorstep. Karen thought she could outmaneuver me with rules, intimidation, and sheer stubbornness. But in the end, she learned something she never wanted to admit. The loudest person in the room isn't the strongest. They're just the most desperate. For me, it was never about revenge. I didn't want to destroy Karen. I didn't want to turn neighbors into enemies. All I wanted was peace, the kind that comes from sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee and listening to the quiet. But to get that peace, I had to draw a line, lock the gate, and prove that no amount of noise or pressure could push me off my ground. Karen lost more than just a title. She lost the trust of the community, the credibility she'd clung to for years, and the illusion of control she thought she had over everyone's lives. And that's the thing about control: once people realize you never really had it, it disappears forever. Now, the cabin stands quiet again. The gate is still locked, the cameras still watch, but for the first time in months, there's no tension humming in the air. Neighbors wave when they drive by. Some stop to chat, some to apologize forever, doubting me. And Karen, she's just a name people whisper now. A cautionary tale about what happens when someone pushes too far. In the end, this wasn't just a battle over property, it was about standing firm when someone tries to take what isn't theirs. about showing that rules and threats only work if you let them, and about reminding everyone that sometimes the best defense is a gate that closes with a resounding clang. So, let me ask you this. If you were in my shoes, with Karen pounding at your door, would you have handled it the same way? Or would you have opened the gate and let chaos in, just to avoid the fight? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you would have dealt with a Karen of your own. And if you enjoyed this wild ride of HOA drama, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more, and share this story with someone who's had their own battle with a neighbor who just didn't know when to quit. Because at the end of the day, sometimes the only way to win is to lock the gate and keep it that way.